So I'm just going to use this session now to think about revision for the exam. Having gone through each of the sessions on Blackboard, I know there's a lot of information to take in there, and my expectation is that you will focus on certain aspects of the law if you're interested in them, or you've got a better understanding of them, or maybe you've struggled with one area, so you've tried to kind of improve your understanding of that. So I totally appreciate that it is a difficult task to have got so many new pieces of information into your heads, and to be able to feel that you're going to have to go into an exam and you're going to be asked absolutely anything. Well, that is not the case. That's not going to happen. The purpose of the exam is to get you to think about the application of the law in practice. But the main part of that is about you having some choice in what you want to talk about in the exam. So the first part of the exam is 10 multiple choice questions, and hopefully out of all those questions you will be able to, having done the module and even the kind of overview of each piece of legislation, you will be able to do okay in that. But just to give you a few more kind of hints, because I know you can think, oh well, it's huge, the amount of information that's been given to you. So I'll just give you a few pointers of where you should be looking at. I think in terms of, we talked about the legislation relating to children. We talked within that about some of the specific sections, but we're thinking primarily about that principle, about the first section around the child being of paramount importance and what that means in social pedagogical terms. In terms of it's something that our law states, that the child is their welfare is paramount, and thinking about what that means in practice. We also, sticking to those kind of themes of leading principles in legislation, we also talked about the Care Act 2014 and the fact that that first principle was about promoting well-being. And within the promotion of well-being, if you remember, there were 9 domains of well-being that we looked at. So they're contained within that first section of the Act. So it would be well worth trying to look at those domains and making sure that you understand them. We also looked at the Equality Act, and we looked at the public sector duty, the equality duty in there. So you might want to think about under what circumstances people can use the Equality Act. So we talked about protected characteristics. So understanding what those terms are will be useful. We also talked about legislation relating to mental health, and you might have done some of your own research around that, but also thinking within the mental health legislation about how that can be used in terms of promoting independence, but also in trying to promote in looking at that difficulty, that contentious issue we have around care and control, and that we are aware that, you know, there are sections within the mental health legislation which can lead to somebody being detained in hospital. So just have a look at some of the other areas. We then went on to have a look at the Mental Capacity Act 2005, and again we talked about some of those leading principles that inform that act. So if you remember, we talked about how Halton could connect with those, and thinking about it's really important that we enter each situation that we're thinking about that somebody has capacity, and that they it's about us supporting them to enhance that decision making process. So really try and think about what some of those principles are, and if you know those, that'll be useful. We did some initially in the work. In the first session, if you remember, I talked about what legislation is, how it works, how it goes through the parliamentary process, and thinking about, I particularly go back and have a look at how and why does something become an act? What are the things that have to happen for it to be an act? That it isn't necessarily at that political level at the end, but also involves the monarch. So if you have a think about where that, when we talked about that. We also talked about how something starts to become an act. So we talked about the different papers, and the fact that we've got white papers, we've got green papers, when something is a bill and when something is an act. So just